this second episode of the Diversity Toolkit, we're looking at 5 frequent reactions that can trip us up around managing diversity. I'm talking to a colleague of mine and a friend, Anne-Marie, about her experiences. So welcome, Anne-Marie, and thanks for being on Zoom with us today. Anne-Marie, we've got these pitfalls, these traps that can trip us up when we're line managing diversity.
Yep.
So let me kick off with intention and effect.
Okay.
And what I'm curious about here is, how often have you heard a phrase like, I'm sure he didn't mean to, that's just him?
Oh, yes. 1,000 times, probably.
Give us an instance.
Okay, so one example that I can think of, I had a line manager who was, to all intents and purposes, he wasn't very effective. He was quite bullying and quite sort of, inappropriate at times. And I do remember one particular occasion where I complained about something. And I was told, he didn't mean it like that. It's all, he's under a lot of pressure, so you shouldn't take it sort of personally. But it's not about, in terms of being a manager, it's about being consistent. And we all have bad days, and we shouldn't bring that to work. We should, behave in a way that's professional and consistent.
So sounds like the conversation had been switched around to his issues rather than focus. So it's about he didn't mean to be bad, as it were. He didn't mean to be nasty.
Yes. Yeah.
What about the effect? Was that talked about? The effect on you was talked about at all?
Well, I said it. I didn't feel comfortable with that, and I was told, well, actually, you should be more understanding of the pressure that he's under. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute. So that made me feel as if my feeling about it was not important, because the bigger picture is he's got bigger fish to fry and more important things to do.
What about this line that, that's just me. I can be a bit abrupt with everyone.
Yes, I've heard that as well. And so it is essentially, just leading on from the example that I just gave, it's the same. It's, well, I'm like that with everybody, but it's not an excuse to say, well, because I'm awful with everyone, you should just accept it. Because actually, he needs to be thinking about, well, why am I awful with everybody? That's not a way to manage effectively in a team.
Do you think we experience this behavior different? I mean, each of us experiences behavior differently. So you can't say it's universally bad. It's actually differently bad for everyone.
I would definitely agree with that, because, as individuals, we all have, elements and facets of who we are. So you might experience something very differently. So I might say something to you, and I might say something to another colleague. You might experience it in one way because of who you are in the whole, and lots of different experiences you might have had, and someone else might be experience that in a particular different way. But it can still equally be as bad. So,
how does that tie in with racism or disability discrimination for you?
So for me, sometimes, so the one I was just describing was, I experienced that as both, well, actually, as 3 things. So it was around disability, it was around race, and it was around my gender. So my observation and my feeling and my experience was that he was dismissive of me as a disabled person, and saw me as less valuable to the team, and did not respect me as a woman and as a Black woman. So on all those levels, and at different times, you might feel it differently, but it's still your total experience. So it isn't just, so if I'd have said, oh, I experienced that as racist, the response might have been, well, he didn't mean it as, he's not a racist. And actually, you know, that was how I experienced it. And it's almost as if you're saying to somebody, your experience is not valuable, is not relevant.
Move us on to the famous politician's apology, which which goes along the lines of, my remarks were taken out of context, or even worse, I'm sorry if I gave offence. Now, what about this "I gave offence" thing? Where does offence come into managing diversity and managing these issues?
It's interesting because offence, what I might find offensive, you might not, and vice versa. So for me, it's very much about, let's have a level, a standard, a set of values that I might not find it offensive, but also I might not find it personally offensive, but I can recognize how someone else might find it offensive. So an example that I have, I used to work for London Underground. And there was an example that was shared. There were two station staff on the station platform having a conversation. A member of the public walked by, found what they were saying offensive, made a complaint. When they were called into their manager's office, they said, oh, but it was a private conversation. And the manager said, no, it wasn't private because you were on a public platform and anyone could hear that. So it's not about, well, we were having a private conversation, therefore we weren't offended, so why should you be? It's, you know, to me, it's not about the offence, it's about the standard. So actually, they shouldn't have been having that conversation for it to be overheard and potentially for someone to be offended by it. But I can be not offended by something and still recognise the inappropriateness of something being said or done. So it's about the values and the standards. It's not about, oh, well, I didn't, so-and-so wasn't offended, so it's all right. That doesn't make it right.
One of the sort of things, the sort of common themes is that the issue is sort of diverted into a side lane and becomes something else. And I think there are a couple of other ways in which that happens, and I'm curious about your experiences of this. It either becomes described as a personality clash, or it suddenly transmogrifies into something about, you know, your poor performance. So what about those two things? I mean, that you're aggressive, or you brought this on yourself, or you don't get on with her, or whatever it is. Say a word for us about
that. That really resonates with me. One, in terms of the aggression, because there are certain experiences and certain groups who are described as being aggressive. So, for example, if I think about being a Black woman, particularly, often, if you are being forceful or being just putting your point across in a way that isn't sort of retiring and holding back, then you are often described as being aggressive. And the way I sort of work that out is that if you are a man in that situation, you're described, and it's partly about language as well. So a man will be described as forceful and just really stand up, whereas a woman, and particularly a Black woman, because that is a real coded thing around racism and Black women being described as aggressive, and that's not helpful, and it's not good. And
so it's like reshaped to something that, you know, your aggression has rubbed her up the wrong way, and therefore now there's a clash of personalities.
Absolutely.
And let's call in the mediators to get you all together. I know from knowing you that you've also had the microscope put on your performance as another diversion.
For sure. So I had sat with a particular manager, and I was voicing my concerns about the way I was being managed by somebody else. And I was told, well, actually, there are concerns about your performance, Anne-Marie. And I thought, well, this is the first time it's been brought up. And it's almost as if, well, if you were more effective, if you were performing better, this wouldn't have happened. So again, it's about blaming you and saying it's all your fault. You need to change something, and then it will all be all right. And it's just not. Again, it makes you feel, well, you question everything. Question everything, and you it can knock your confidence as well.
And of course, not confidence in its own way leads to making. I mean, you say, I'm going to be perfect, and blow me down. The first thing you do is make a mistake.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, it seems to me there's two ways that managers can guard against this. That one is that to have the senior manager audit and check up on how the manager is managing. So that's like a regularly they're asked, how is your line management going? Let's talk it through. Let's talk about the issues and all
yes.
that. So that's an auditing, quite sharp auditing, rather like you audit the budget. You audit line management.
Absolutely.
As well. But the other, which I know you've got experience of, is staff forums for particular groups. So LGBTQ plus staff forums, staff forums for women, staff forums for Black and minority ethnic people. And you've been part of those, haven't you? And they I think they provide what? They provide a support or a sharing, or
it's a little bit of both. I think it's about recognizing actually that it's not just you.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you're on the receiving end of that bad behavior, whether you're being bullied or harassed, or it's just being discriminated against in some way, it can be very, very isolating. So you kind of think, oh my gosh, is it me? As I said, when I made the comment earlier about, confidence, so it's, oh, maybe I'm not performing well and I've brought this on myself. And so it can be a very sort of isolating experience. So when you go along and you realize that there are other people who have similar experiences, that is quite a supportive environment to be in.
It's the old thing of patterns, isn't it? That I mean, that
yes.
one instance is a mistake or a bad luck,
absolutely,
whatever. Two is a strange coincidence, and three starts to give data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good point, because I think lots of organisations and management look at, they try and see everything as a one-off.
Yes.
Oh, it's just, so they don't make, or whether they don't recognise that there's a link, or it's a willful ignoring of that there's a link.
Yes.
But either way, it's like, oh no, that was different. That was different. And it just, rather than actually there's a pattern here.
And of course, what we do know is that definitions of institutional discrimination, institutional racism, are one of the features is you look for patterns, for data provides you with patterns, and then it's part of the culture. Look, let's go to an old colonial friend called divide and rule.
Yes.
This plays itself out in line management too, doesn't it? Because very often I'll say, well, your oppression may be significant, but it's certainly not anything like as bad as my oppression.
Yes.
And therefore, I've got you. How does that work? Issues in competition with each other.
It's like it sets up a hierarchy of things. So it's all terrible, and it all needs to be managed properly and effectively, but it leaves people falsely putting in competition, as you said, with each other. So saying that you can't possibly understand that my racism is the experience of racism is worse than your experience of disability discrimination or LGBT discrimination. Well, actually, all of that discrimination is wrong. It also keeps people in silos.
Absolutely,
so they don't you were talking earlier about patterns.
Yeah.
It keeps people away from recognizing that there is a pattern, because
Absolutely.
actually, no, it's something completely different. No, there is a pattern to the way certain things happen, but that keeping people separately makes that pattern sometimes more difficult to recognize.
The friend of mine who's a trans man, told me
Yeah.
recently of how he raised an instance of transphobia around pronouns as usual in a team
Yeah,
meeting,
sure.
and was instantly turned on by a woman in the meeting who was accused him of being sexist for using an inappropriate terminology. I think he used the word ladies rather than women.
Okay.
And that seems to me this sort of, I dread to say the word, but actually an attempt to trump out a particular issue with another issue.
Yeah.
And suddenly you find you're dealing with the trump card rather than with the original card.
Absolutely.
And that's, in my experience, quite a frequent way of stymieing the issue. Okay, Anne-Marie, you're full of examples, which is great because it helps us sort of feel the reality of it. I suppose one final quickie question out of curiosity. Yeah. So I know you've just made a house move and you've also left a job. Where were you working when these examples?
Now, that is the most amusing. I was working for an equality and diversity consultancy.
I don't think we can trump that one, Anne-Marie. So,
no.
Many thanks for sharing those stories with us. So I just want to, for the benefit of the people looking at the episode, give a little summary of what we're talking about.
Sure.
So you started off talking about the importance of the effect of behaviours rather than the intention.
Yes.
Although, of course, we have to be aware of the intention, but it's the effect that is being managed, not the intention.
Yes.
The second is that different behaviors have different impacts on people, and a behavior which is just bad behavior to one person may in fact be experienced as sexism or racism to another person.
Sure.
Justifiable argument is not, well, I'm like that with everyone. We talked a bit about offence, and that offended me, or you might offend someone, or I'm sorry for offence. And actually, what we're really talking about in the workplace on salary is the values of the organisation. That breaches the values of the organisation. It's not about a personal feeling about it. I think the dangers of two diversions. One is that your personality brings it on yourself, and now we're making personality conflict. Or the other is I'll bring a microscope onto your performance, which just by the way happens to have popped into my consciousness, and then you start to be over policed and scrutinized.
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea of issues putting competition together, so a manager suddenly finds that you're managing 2 or 3 issues at the same time. Sort them out, manage them one by one, take everyone seriously, but some may be more put there to trump something else out than another. And I think that's probably, watching for those sorts of traps when you're line manager can be really helpful, because I think it can stop you falling into them, because they are almost become so much part of our organizational culture, so they're almost like knee-jerk reactions.
Absolutely.
So I think that more or less rounds off our story for episode 2 of our toolkit. And thank you for Zooming with us, Anne-Marie.
And pleasure.
Happy settling into your new place.
Thank you.